we can have you back anytime. And if you've got a bunch of fucking photos from your trip to Syria, let's go through them and listen to you tell stories.
Yeah, I get, like, there's one little spiel I'd like to go on about the domestic side of things that, like, I talk about this. I've been doing, like, I was on the BBC and NPR and, like, doing a bunch of shit after the last shooting because they call me up every time someone from 8chan murders people. And there's something I never get to talk about, or I talk about it.
Sorry, can I interrupt you? What is 8chan? I don't know what that is. Is that 2 times worse than 4chan?
If the internet's asshole, if the asshole of the internet had an asshole, that's 8chan.
And it's actually called 8chan.
Yeah, it's
8chan
called
developed
8chan.
because child porn was banned on 4chan.
And
they're like, well, we
Gamergate.
can't have this.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it was popularized because of Gamergate, but I think that's why it was invented. It's like, we need a 4chan to trade child porn.
Yeah,
What?
it was.
Yes, that's the starting point.
It's
and it
like,
only got worse.
Yeah. They took a real Nazi turn after 2014, and it's stupid and it's sad, but it's why like 80 people have died this year.
But there's a really important provocative conversation. I'm going to let you do your rant in 1 second because I can already hear like from my wonderful like audience that I respect the hell out of them, and like if I only think about the stuff on the drive over here, I thought the same thought immediately when all this talk about like we got to pull the plug on 8chan and all this stuff. And my first thought is like, well, wait a minute, that can't possibly be the solution. And I don't want anybody listening to this podcast to think that like it's just that like that's why I say go Google Rob Evans, read his shit. This guy, as much as he's been in Syria and Iraq, has been on 4chan and 8chan, and just read the stuff because it's not forcing you to do anything. Just read his stuff and start to like understand the climate of and the definitions of when do you start to call something an actual like fucking cell? I just like the fact that I have to gingerly say that is like a sign of the crazy ass times. But now do your thing.
Yeah, I mean, so I started covering 8chan in 2014 because I was a comedian at that point in time, and I worked for a website called crack.com that did a comedy video about personifying different websites on the internet as like kids in a high school, and it personified 8chan as this creepy kid like hitting on another young woman in like a really creepy and abusive way. And like that was the joke, is that that's the kid 8chan would have been in high school. And they found the video and they got angry. And they didn't go after the director of the video, who was a man. They didn't go after any of the writers of the video, who were men. They went after the actress. And they started like sending dead animals to her house, letters written in blood to her house. Like this is like 2014. So I just start checking in on these guys a couple of times a year, just because I'm like, what the fuck is happening here? And in 2016, the president retweets a meme that they create. You guys saw that picture of Hillary Clinton with like the Star of David behind her that says most corrupt candidate ever? That was an 8chan meme. So I wrote a thing about them for the comedy website that I wrote for at that time. And then I just keep looking in. And then the Christchurch massacre happens. And because I'd been working on extremism and stuff during that time, I read the guy's manifesto and I see that it was posted on 8chan, and I like write a thing about it like while the bodies are still warm, and suddenly like all these journalists from legacy media are being like, can you explain the internet to us? And like that's why I'm in this position. But what I think is important for people to understand, that I tell to every journalist from a big station that talks to me that they never play. They never put it on the radio, they never put it on TV. This shit goes back further than the internet as we know it. In the early 1980s, there was a terrorist group called The Order, which was inspired by a book called The Turner Diaries, which is a fictional book about a white race war that is sparked by like terrorist cells carrying out like random acts of violence.
It's a fantasy.
It's a fantasy for white supremacists.
Fascists, who maybe don't call themselves fascists, blowing up enough shit.
And the terrorist group in the book is called The Order, and the real terrorist group was called The Order.
And they're protagonists or antagonists?
Oh, they're the heroes.
They're protagonists. Like most terrorist written fiction, it doesn't really have good structure. Because it's just like, once upon a time, we blew up enough shit that we got to...
be America.
Which women we got to fuck, and it was great.
Timothy McVeigh, we nuked the Urals. Yeah. So this real terrorist group called the Order starts up, and they mostly rob banks and armored cars. They only kill a couple of people, but they make off with about $4 million in cash. Some of it goes to buy rocket launchers and machine guns
this
and
I know
shit.
about. Okay.
This part people know. What people don't know is that most of the weapons that the money bought got confiscated eventually. The army and shit tracked them down. The FBI figured that shit out. But a lot of the money went to buy Apple II computers and early networking equipment, which connected KKK cells and new neo-Nazi cells and like white supremacist readouts in places like the Aryan Nations up in Idaho on an early internet network called LibertyNet. Now, this is in the mid-1980s. By the mid-1990s, there were researchers realizing there's an organized neo-Nazi presence on like Usenet and shit, like the early internet, like on these fucking like what were they even called? Not message boards, like even fucking before
News
that.
groups?
News groups, like
was on those.
politics and shit. Like there's Nazis all over these places, and they start finding Nazi manifestos written about how to radicalize people on the internet and how if somebody confronts you, the first thing to say is "I'm not a Nazi." Use humor and jokes and try to claim that you're just joking if people call you on like your ironic fascism and stuff. And like if we just put this stuff out into the atmosphere often enough, this is how we can recruit people. And so what we're seeing with 8chan, and not just with 8chan, but with like this broader constellation of like neo-Nazis and fascists on the internet who are radicalizing larger and larger groups of people and who sort of metastasized in the 2017 Charlottesville March, where you got hundreds of these people in real life, is the culmination of 30 years of really diligent work. And that's why I try to treat these people and have tried to push the mainstream media, and when I speak to law enforcement, when I lecture at colleges, try to talk to them about, you have to treat them as if they're like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and maybe they're not that organized, and they're certainly not a central figurehead of the group, but they function that way, and they've been doing so for decades, and it's time we acted like it.
Yeah.